Namaskar. Welcome to the 14th episode of Satya Samvad. The general elections of Bharat in 2024 were the largest electoral event in the history of mankind. Long queues of voters in the polling stations from across the country conveyed their belief and trust in the democratic process. 64.2 crore voters, including 31.2 crore women voters, voted in this historic exercise with over 68,000 monitoring teams and 1.5 crore polling and security personnel. It was truly a Chunav Ka Parv, a festival of democracy. The Bharatiya Janata Party, under the able leadership of Shri Narendra Modi, emerged as the single largest party in the Lok Sabha with 240 seats. There were, however, some worrying developments. Amritpal Singh, who is under arrest under the National Security Act and has in the past openly questioned the very idea of modern India, was elected from Khadur Sahib, while Sheikh Abdul Rashid, currently lodged in Delhi's Tihar jail on charges of financing terrorism, won the Jammu and Kashmir constituency of Baramulla. I believe that we, the Bharatiya as a nation, as the people, must ensure that no anti-national element must enter the hallowed grounds of our temple of democracy, the Indian Parliament. Nationalism is the idea of establishing a congruence between a nation and a state. And yes, they're not always the same. A state is defined by political boundaries, while a sense of a nation is a cohesive whole, as represented by distinctive traditions, culture, and language. Most importantly, a nation has with it a lived history and a collective consciousness. Postmodern left-liberal internationalism may assert the need to transcend nationalism altogether, as would some communities that harbor a sense of tribalism premised on doctrinal elements of thought. But the reality of our times is that nationalism has been among the most functional threads that weaves the fabric of an effective polity for people. There are three primary schools of thought on national identity. The essentialist perspective sees national identity as immutable, unchanging, rooted in factors like ancestry, common language, shared history, ethnicity, and collective worldviews. The constructivists, on the other hand, emphasize the role of political processes and the exercise of power by dominant groups to secure and sustain a privileged status within society. Lastly, the civic identity school focuses on the importance of shared values regarding rights and the legitimacy of state institutions to govern. Nationalism has had different historical roots in different parts of the world. Bavarian uber-nationalism, post-World War I, for instance, arose from a position of protest against what the Germans saw as unfair treatment meted out to their country. In the 19th century, Japan saw some prominent daimyo advocating for a return to traditional values in what is called as Fuko, while others supported the idea of Osei, which is the emperor's supreme authority, with these ideas merging into this premise of Sonojoy, which means revere the emperor but expel the barbarians, driving the Meiji Restoration period mainly for political and economic reasons, with the government increasingly emphasizing social harmony and the unique identity of the Japanese people in what is regarded as kokutai. Generally, we can see that nationalism has been used as a utilitarian construct, something useful for expanding the power of the state. In Bharat, however, the state was premised on more than the bounds of specific political or cultural nationalities. In understanding how this is the case, you will see how Indian nationalism can evolve into the quintessential paragon of cosmopolitanism in what I term as spiritual nationalism. In this vision, nationalism is inherently a spiritual reality, embracing values that promote not only national pride, but also universal human dignity and global responsibility. Our Indic civilization, right from the days of the Sindhu Saraswati Sabhyata, has seen a decentralization of political power at various points. Firstly, among cities like Harappa, Ganeriwal, Mohenjo-daro, Dholavira, Kalibangan, Rakhigari, Rupar, and Lothal. Then kingdoms like the Rashtrakutas, the Gurjara Pratiharas, the Palas, and thereafter even countries, with India and Nepal being two of the modern nation states with a significant Indic legacy, all the while maintaining a commonality in cultural and civilizational aspects. This is arguably the reason why the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the RSS, speaks of a form of cultural Hindu, with this term denoting civilizational rather than necessarily religious aspects, nationalism that cuts across large swathes of South Asia and Southeast Asia. Even within this expanse, we see the ever-evolving nature of culture and cultural ethos in distant geocentric locations. The Indic concepts practiced in Thailand or Cambodia are very different than those in India or Pakistan. For example, in Thailand, Theravada Buddhism prefer to believe that in an ontology that opposes any form of absoluteness of things that we see in our world. This is reflected in the manner in which followers of Theravada Buddhism are encouraged to seek the truth of reality in meditation and reflection based on the concept of shunyata, or void, if you will. On the other hand, in India, traditions that believe in Sakar or Saguna Brahman, the ultimate reality that assumes a form and has attributes, aligns with idol worship and association of the ultimate reality with a form. Even the Ramayana in Thailand and in Bharat have various narrative variations that may seem inconsistent, if not paradoxical in certain places. Then what truly connects us? That which relates to the spirit of a people. The next question you will ask me, then what is that? How does one even define such a subjective concept? Well, one does not. One seeks and actively engages with the evolving consciousness of the people. Invariably, this must be a balance of what we call as Yugdharm, which is the socio-cultural and spiritual framework of the age, and Swadharm, which is a stage of evolution of the individual, primarily spiritually. In the contemporary world, we have a number of binaries: globalization versus nationalism, Occidental versus Oriental, common people against the elites. But a key question is, are these concepts interrelated, and do we even need these binaries? The key to resolving this may be to understand the underlying spiritual dimension of modern geopolitics. Unfortunately, in today's age, in many places, spirituality in politics and nationalism has become intertwined with irrational populism, religious extremism, or nostalgia for bygone eras. However, we must recall and remember, spirituality was the bedrock and point of origin of the concepts of democracy and the nation state in a limited form, even in the West. The idea of the nation state is premised on the linkage of politics to commonality among the citizens and the nation as a basis for political action. Jean-Jacques Rousseau gave us the principle of civil religion during the Enlightenment in 18th century Europe. A rather thought-provoking point he expresses in his work, The Discourse on the Origin of Inequality, is, I quote, "The first man who, having enclosed a piece of ground, bethought himself of saying, 'This is mine,' and found people simple enough to believe him, was a real founder of civil society. From how many crimes, wars, and murders, from how many horrors and misfortunes might not anyone have saved mankind by pulling up the stakes or filling up the ditch and crying to his fellows, 'Beware of listening to this impostor. You're undone if you once forget that the fruits of the earth belong to us all and the earth itself to nobody,'" unquote. It was in accepting the shortcomings of man in his avarice and insecurity, and thereafter formulating a way to transcend this with a common thread among the civilians in the form of his civil religion, that Rousseau truly made a mark in the evolving discourse of nations and nationalism. Regardless of how the nation is delineated, be it in an ethnic or civic manner, conservative or liberal way, it happens to be a profoundly transcendental notion of what links individuals through a contrived and yet ubiquitous idea of common identity. Man as a collective whole of a people became supreme in the political space based on the power delegated to this collective by the citizens of a country. Any nation-building exercise involves the formation of a foundation, often with a historical or cultural myth-making, in the light of which socio-political order gains meaning and purpose and even order. As American writer and public intellectual Gore Vidal once wrote, "No myth, no nation." Rational arguments would critique the very basis of this pursuit, given the cross-section of identities each individual has, and in bypassing this, nationalism provides a certain transcendental principle. We see a certain spiritual vacuum in today's politics, which fringe elements in international politics have tapped into, using symbols that can help in establishing solidarity and communitarian spirit. However, these have been subverted, and there has been a perversion of sorts. Symbols help the common man to connect to an otherwise abstract idea. As the existential philosopher and theologian Paul Tillich once said, and I quote, "Man's ultimate concerns must be expressed symbolically because symbolic language alone is able to express the ultimate." Symbols have a certain objective reality, their interpretations being subjective. And this subjectivity helps in formulating a vision of a future that is built on a bridge to the past and the present of the people, be it historically, politically, culturally, religious ways, socially, philosophically, or a combination of all of these. This temporal entanglement, so to say, provides a spiritual moment, a point of transcendence, a utopian core, which looks beyond the pragmatism of everyday life and politics. Symbolism in politics is not necessarily based on a factual basis, but more often on an ingenious and normative what should be rather than what is. The popularity of the use of moments of transcendence by politicians from across the political aisle shows us that people yearn for a more profound meaning in politics. Former Prime Minister Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee, known for his eloquence, often infused his speeches with poetry that evoked cultural and national pride, reflecting a deeper sense of cultural identity. Shri Bal Gangadhar Tilak's approach to activism and politics was influenced by the concept of Karma Yoga as outlined in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. He believed in selfless action and duty, dharma, viewing political activism as a righteous path to serve the nation and uphold its spiritual and cultural values. Shri Bal Gangadhar Tilak's advocacy for Swadeshi, which is indigenous goods and self-reliance, was not merely economic, but also had a spiritual dimension. He viewed economic self-sufficiency as a means to preserve and promote India's cultural and spiritual heritage, resisting the cultural hegemony imposed by the British. Shri Bal Gangadhar Tilak's call for Swarajya is my birthright was underpinned by his understanding of dharma in the context of duty and righteousness, and Swarajya, which is self-rule. He believed that achieving self-rule was not just a political goal, but a moral imperative rooted in the spiritual and cultural ethos of India. The ultimate exemplar of the principle of spirituality within politics, duty, and nationalism, however, has to be Shri Krishna and what he says to Arjun before the Kurukshetra war. Placing himself or his Narayani Sena, one or the other, as an option to support the Kauravas and the Pandavas before Duryodhan and Arjun, and thereafter guiding the Pandav to victory, showed his emphasis on spirituality, morals, and a dharmic way of life, needing to be the premise of a Rashtra over and above power, glory, wealth, and politicking. Sri Ram, in his quest to help Mata Sita, who is also known as Bhumija, the one who came from the earth, fought to defeat the epitome of ego in Ravan for the betterment of the earth. That collective call and pursuit drove various tribes and people to unite under what can be regarded as a spiritual aim of emancipation is a beautiful story and an example for us all within Bharat and beyond. Modern politics in most nations are premised on democracy that attempts at inclusively shaping the advancement of a people towards a sustainable future. It can be inherently agonistic in the struggle and conflict of ideologies that can give us distinct ways to secure such a future. Many of the tendencies of the people, particularly populism, are irrational and constructed, all the while helping with common political action. Even during the elections that just concluded in Bharat, many of us may have pondered on how modern electioneering can be skewed by certain leaders in the direction of being about the balance of self-interest more than the general welfare. Argentine philosopher Ernesto Laclau speaks of an inherent duality encapsulated in any such socio-political or conceptual constructs. On one hand, the hollowness of the concept itself, and on the other hand, the symbolic basis that it can provide for a social order. This, however, will be contingent and is contingent on situational dynamics. If Alfred Rosenberg and Abhijit Naskar are to be heard, the nation is a myth that is arguably necessary to guarantee social cohesion and one that is invested in by people across the length and breadth of the nation over time. One of the reasons ultra-rationalists fall to the ultra-nationalists of the age is because they are immersed in a post-ideological perspective. They often cannot perceive the transcendental concept of a national people. What India has had since times immemorial is a civilizational instantiation of this transcendental concept. This is highly paradoxical given that we have had political flux over centuries with invasions and turmoil. What makes this instantiation ingrained within the Bharatiya Sabhyata is the manner in which it relates to the pursuit of truth. The truth of life, of socio-cultural interactions, of the world around us, of the fundamental nature of reality itself. In this pursuit, we must inherently be cosmopolitan, given the various kinds of ways in which one can approach the very concept of truth. That is where the Bharatiya conception of nationalism is different. A number of Indian luminaries engaged with the concept of politics and democracy in pre-independence Bharat. These were the formulations of a people who would wake up to the independence of a nation, of a people, of a civilization, after centuries of subjugation and subservience to foreign powers. Sri Aurobindo saw India's freedom in the larger context of the destiny of mankind, since he thought of India as the quintessence of spiritual knowledge and reality, as well as a land of sublime spiritual attainments of humanity. In an editorial for Bande Mataram, he said, and I quote, "India must have Swaraj in order to live for the world, not as a slave for the material and political benefit of a single purse-proud and selfish nation, but a free people for the spiritual and intellectual benefit of the human race." He believed that Bharat could be the spiritual battleground where the forces of darkness and ignorance can be conquered. The philosophy of Indian seers of the past has always looked at looking through and beyond the gross body and find a subtler self, beyond which lay the essence of Brahman, the Dharmic conceptualization of the ultimate reality of the universe, which happens to be and is described as imperishable and immutable. Sri Aurobindo saw in this ideation the seed of how a commonality between individuals can be expressed in the self-similarity of nature. The self-similarity means what is present in the individual is also present in the universal. This concept is beautifully portrayed in the Mahavakya Aham Brahmasmi, mentioned in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. In the context of the nation, this gets expressed in the idea that what is the truth of man is also the truth of the nation. Sri Aurobindo connected our inner selves, as per Dharmic traditions, to the nation self, with an allusion to the idea of the Pancha Kosha, mentioned in the Taittiriya Upanishad. He says, and I quote, "The country, the land, is only the outward body of the nation, its Annamaya Kosha, or gross physical body. The mass of people, the life of millions who occupy and vivify the body of the nation with their presence, is a Pranamaya Kosha, the life body of the nation. These two are the gross body, the physical manifestation of the mother. Within the gross body is a subtler body, the thoughts, the literature, the philosophy, the mental and emotional activities, the sum of all the hopes, the pleasures, the aspirations, the fulfillment, the civilization and culture, which make up the Sukshma Sharir of the nation. This is as much a part of the mother's life as the outward existence, which is visible to the physical eyes. This subtle life of the nation again springs from a deeper existence in the causal body of the nation, the peculiar temperament which it has developed out of its ages of experience and which makes it distinct from others. The millions are born and die. We who are here today will not be here tomorrow, but the mother has been living for thousands of years and will live for yet more thousands when we have passed away. Sri Aurobindo's nationalism had a spiritual aim, the recovery of Indian character, thought, energy, perspectives, and glory, all the while driving towards solving problems faced by humanity in a distinctly Indian spirit that draws from its glorious heritage and socio-cultural and spiritual core. Rabindranath Tagore also wrote extensively on nationalism. His brand of nationalism was fundamentally rooted in the question of what it means to be human. According to Tagore, the term nationalism was derived from the term nation-state, which he saw as a carrier of capitalism and mechanization. And he believed that these ideals went against the Indian tradition of pluralism, self-autonomy, and cosmopolitanism. Tagore felt that the flaws of contemporary Western political civilization arise due to the bidirectional causal link of the political and the commercial, which is part of the paraphernalia of the modern state. In contrast, he saw the defining feature of the Indian civilization and polity as the self-regulation of communities when it came to their own affairs. He saw the aggressive nationalism of certain European powers in the 20th century as corrosive and abhorrent. Swami Vivekananda's idea of nationalism is based on the two cardinal features of the Indian civilization, universalism, and humanism. He saw freedom and equality through which one can express oneself, along with a spiritual integration of the world on the basis of spiritual brotherhood as a basis for nationalism. For him, Karma Yoga, a system of political and spiritual emancipation and liberation through selfless service, was primary. He believed that the strength of nations is in spirituality, and each nation represents one theme in life, as he highlighted in the words, I quote, "Each nation has a theme, everything else is secondary. India's theme is religion." The inherent egalitarianism and pluralism in his vision of the nationalism was moving. He felt that it was in the collective experience and consciousness of its people that India rises. He says, and I quote, "Let India arise out of the peasant's cottage, grasping the plow, out of the huts of the fisherman, the cobbler, and the sweeper. Let her spring from the grocer's shop, from beside the oven of the fritter seller. Let her emanate from the factory, from the markets. Let her emerge from the groves and the forests, from the hills and the mountains. These common people have suffered oppression for thousands of years, suffered it without murmur, and as a result, have got wonderful fortitude." He emphasized on the rejuvenation of qualities like self-reliance, strength, courage, perseverance, dynamism, and patriotic fervor among his countrymen. Swami Vivekananda connected freedom and equality to the ancient Indian tradition of Vedanta, particularly in the philosophy of Advaita, as beautifully encapsulated in the words, and I quote, "All beings, great or small, are equal manifestations of God. The difference is only in the manifestation," unquote. Bharat is the oldest nation in the world, many would say. Deen Dayal Upadhyaya ji attested to this and called it the Swayam Siddha Hindu Rashtra, or the self-proved Hindu nation. The concept of the nation or a people is an ancient one within the Bharatiya Gyan Pranali, the Indian knowledge systems. In my study of the Vedic corpus, I find the spiritual premise and dimension of nationalism in the Rig Ved Mandal 10, Sukta 173.2. Ihe vedhi mapa chyoshtaha parvata iva vichalihi, Indra ivehe dhruvastishtu rashtramu dhare, which talks of how the ruler must administer without vacillating, without being perturbed, firm like Indra. I believe it is talking of more than just the ruler here, but rather the very basis of the nation and nationalism itself. In Vedanta, Brahman is the ultimate reality, while in Sankhya, Purusha is the transcendental principle. And both are seen as immutable, unchanging, steady, unperturbed. In this shlok, therefore, the premise of the nation is identified with the premise of the universe itself, which is fundamentally spiritual within the Dharmic thinking. In this, the primacy of oneness and interconnectedness of all citizens is inherent. In the Rig Veda, Mandal 10, Sukta 191.4, it says, "Samani va akutih samani hridyani vaha, samanamastu vo mano yathava susahasati," which says that common be your intention, common be the wishes of your heart, common be your thoughts, so that there may be thorough union among you all. The agency of the individual in defining the collective consciousness is given qualified importance. Sovereignty itself is spoken in terms of self-realization and understanding of one's true self. The idea of sovereignty is discussed in a rather decentralized way in the Taittiriya Upanishad Bhashya Vartika, verse 1.121. Nanyo rajosti yaseha raja ya swamevatu, sa swarata tasya bhavasya swarajyameha kirtiyate, which means, here in the world, he who has none else as his king, and he who is himself the king is the sovereign. And his status here is described as sovereignty, again alluding to the spiritual aspect of sovereignty that looks at the inherent spiritual identity and independence of each individual over and above political configurations. As a result, the political coming together of individual consciousness has to be premised on a more spiritual understanding of the space of dissent, debate, and discussion, contradictions and oppositions, coalition, dharma, and collaborations, all aspects of modern day politics and the empirical world. These are all part of the phenomenon in the immanent, in the universe that we can observe today. What Bharatiya nationalism entails is also actively being aware of that which transcends this, the essential non-dual unity and unanimity in perspectives of being and consciousness, beyond and besides all this for the interest of the Rashtra and of humanity. The intricate weaving of dharma into the socio-political realities of the age was something espoused by the learned luminaries of ancient Bharat. At the end of the day, it is in the collective pursuit of understanding our purpose, the world around us, the nuances of connections and interactions itself, the fundamental nature of reality, that we find a commonality that defies the bounds of identities, be it of gender, race, class, caste, or nationality. And it is this pursuit of truth that underlies the civilizational, nay, spiritual nationalism that forms the basis of India, that is Bharat. Jai Hind, Namaskar.